The house woke before the living, a door sighed, and dust rose like breath. Thunder stepped close. Evelyn Hart stood in the hallway and felt the floor remember. She wanted answers, yet feared the name that would unlock them. The portraits watched with dimmed eyes. A clock clicked like distant hooves. May Hart said, "Leave the past where it lies." The air smelled of wet cedar and iron. A paper edge peeked from a cracked baseboard, a thin white blade in the dark. Noah Hart whispered, "Do you hear it?" The rain replied on the roof, steady as a chant. Victor Hale said, "Some stories do not serve the living." Lightning flashed and a shadow crossed the stair like a warning. Evelyn reached for the paper. The ink mark looked like a cut. She pulled anyway, heart drumming, as a voice not hers rose from the walls and spoke a single forbidden name. Morning crawled in gray and thin, and the storm left the house ringing. Evelyn laid the note on the table. The ink bled where rain had kissed it. May set down 2 cups and did not meet her eyes. "May Hart," said some doors only open once. The kitchen clock ticked like a cross-exam. Victor stood in the doorway, unmoving. Victor Hale said, "Give me the paper." Noah hovered near the stove, hugging a mug for warmth. Evelyn felt the name anchor in her chest. She wanted to speak it, to free it, to hear the room accept it. The air smelled of ash and old tea. A floorboard popped like a warning. Evelyn Hart said, "We have carried a lie." She touched the loop of the first letter and felt heat in her palm. May's breath shook. The silence pressed back, heavy and close. Who would say the name aloud first? The church ledger smelled of mildew and secrets. Evelyn turned pages with care while Noah watched, quiet as a pew. Candlelight rippled over ink. A line had been scraped thin, then written again. Victor stood beside the archivist and smiled without warmth. Victor Hale said, "Records fade." Evelyn Hart said, "Truth endures." May waited by the door, hands twisted in her shawl. The bell outside rang noon, like a summons. On page 63, a name returned in a lighter hand, almost pleading. The margins held a date, a witness, a mark like a scar. Noah whispered, "It is her." Evelyn felt the room tilt, steady, then tilt again. The ledger seemed to breathe. The window rattled. The scraped line shivered under her fingertip. Why would someone rewrite a life in softer ink? They found the photograph in a cedar box beneath quilts that smelled of smoke and lavender. Evelyn lifted it with both hands. A blade had cut the corner where a name should sit. "May Hart," said, "Your grandfather swore the cut saved us." Victor's laugh was a dull knife. Victor Hale said, "We kept what mattered." Noah pointed to the edge where the paper thinned to a whisper. The house hummed. A low choir in the walls. Evelyn touched the empty angle and her thumb came away dusty. The face in the frame did not blink. The eyes knew something the room refused. Wind pushed at the window. The photograph bent, then flattened. Evelyn Hart said, "What was taken from her?" The box waited, yawning. What else was buried under neat folds and careful lies? Dusk returned with a red seam along the horizon. Evelyn walked to the family plot behind the house. The grass was wet and high. Stones leaned like tired shoulders. A gap lay where a marker should stand. May followed, slower, each step a memory. Noah counted stones under his breath. Victor kept to the path, shoes clean, eyes hard. Evelyn Hart said, "Lydia Hart belongs here." The name left her mouth and did not break the sky. Wind curled around the trees, carrying a faint hum like a hidden choir. May Hart said, "We were warned." The earth held its breath. Evelyn placed the torn corner of the photo on the empty patch and waited. The ground darkened as if it drank. A single bird called once and fell silent. What would rise now that the name had been planted? Sirens wailed somewhere beyond the fields, and the house shuddered like it heard its name. Evelyn moved fast, heart loud, fingers tight on the ledger copy. May Hart said, "Hide it." Victor Hale stepped closer, smile thin. Victor Hale said, "Give me what you took." Noah clutched his backpack and looked to the back door. Wind drove rain against glass in hard bursts. The lamp flickered, then steadied, then shook again. Evelyn felt anger burn under fear. She would not let the name be buried again. She slid the copy into Noah's pack. Evelyn Hart said, "Run to the church." Victor's hand reached for the bag, calm like a trap. May set her cane between them like a bar. A car pulled into the drive, lights sweeping the room like blades. Tires crunched gravel. New footsteps hit the porch. Who arrived with Victor at this hour? They cut through wet rows of corn, and the stalks slapped their sleeves. Breath came in clouds. Noah counted steps to keep calm. The sirens faded to a hum, replaced by frogs in the ditch. Evelyn slowed near the low bridge and listened. May Hart said, "The old rectory keeps a spare key." Evelyn squeezed her hand, felt the shake, felt the years. Victor's car moved along the road like a dark river. They crouched until its sound fell away. Noah Hart said, "Why would he want a page from a book?" Evelyn thought of the scraped line, the witness, the seal. The air tasted of metal and mud. A barn owl crossed the moon like a soft blade. Evelyn Hart said, "Because the page proves a theft." The river carried a branch past their boots. What else would the current surface by morning? The rectory door resisted, then let them in with a wooden sigh. A single bulb buzzed above a table, stacked with forms. On the wall hung a framed deed with Victor's name in clean ink. Evelyn read the seal and felt heat under her skin. Victor Hale said, "You trespass," his voice filling the hall before he stepped inside. He did not rush. He moved like he owned the air. May Hart said, "You forged a signature." Victor's smile did not move his eyes. Victor Hale said, "I corrected a record." He set down a leather folder, slow, careful. He liked control. He liked silence. Noah edged toward a filing cabinet, small and quick. Evelyn's throat was dry but steady. Evelyn Hart said, "Lydia Hart was named Heir." Victor's gaze hardened, then softened like a blade sheathed. What would he do to keep that sentence from breathing? They slipped into the archive cellar, where the stone kept its own weather. Candles lined a shelf, and a small chair waited. The air smelled of old ink and rain. May lowered herself and looked at Evelyn the way a door looks at a key. May Hart said, "Lydia refused Victor a deed, and I stayed silent." The words fell heavy. Evelyn touched her shoulder. Noah listened, hands still at last. "May Hart," said, "silence is a room that shrinks." Her eyes were wet but bright. She spoke of a winter meeting, a threat, a pen. The truth felt simple and hard. Evelyn Hart said, "We can name her now, and we can show the record." Above them the floor creaked like a warning. May Hart said, "Truth frees and breaks. Which lesson would tear the least skin from this house?" Dawn broke pale and fog hung low along the fence. Evelyn wrapped the ledger copy in plastic and tied it with twine. Her hands were steady. May Hart said, "Once you take this to the clerk, there is no return." Evelyn looked at Noah. He nodded, small but clear. Victor Hale said, "You will regret the noise you make." His voice came from the doorway, soft and cold. Evelyn Hart said, "I regret silence more." She tucked the copy into Noah's pack again and stepped into the yard. The grass soaked her jeans to the knee. A truck engine turned over down the lane. She breathed once, slow, then faster. She chose movement. She chose a public office and a line and a stamp. The fence rattled in wind. Would the town listen before Victor closed the door again? By midday, the clerk's office hummed with quiet routines. The copier clicked, the clock chimed, and the air smelled of paper and lemon. Calm wrapped the room like a thin blanket. A new clerk greeted them with a patient smile. Claire Morton said, "I can help you file a correction." Evelyn felt the floor hold still for the first time in days. May Hart said, We bring proof and a name. Claire walked them to a counter and checked forms with care. Noah leaned his elbows and traced the edge of the twine. Victor waited by the door and watched the glass. Claire Morton said, "Sign here and here." Her pen did not scratch. It whispered. A shadow crossed the window and stopped. Evelyn's chest tightened. Why did the room feel safe and wrong at the same time? Claire guided them to a private booth and lowered her voice. Claire Morton said, "I grew up hearing fragments of this story." She glanced at Victor and looked away. Evelyn offered the copy. Claire read fast, lips pressed, eyes bright. Noah Hart said, "Will the stamp make it real?" Claire Morton said, "It makes it hard to ignore." May's hands unclenched. Victor shifted, then smiled at a deputy through the glass. The deputy nodded once. Evelyn felt a small warmth bloom and then cool. She wanted to trust Claire's careful tone. Claire Morton said, "There is a fee and a notice period." Her pen hovered. She added a sticky tab, then another. She met Evelyn's eyes with kindness that hid fatigue. What did that tiny pause try to warn them about? Victor stepped into the booth space and placed a new paper on the counter. Victor Hale said, "Here is certified affidavit." His tone was smooth and final. The seal flashed under the lamp. Evelyn read the name below the lines and felt cold. It was Lydia's witness. But the signature slanted different, neat, where it once trembled. Claire Morton said, "This was filed last week." May Hart said, "Impossible." Victor's smile held no weight, only polish. He had moved first while they slept. He had shaped the lane ahead. Evelyn Hart said, "You forged a witness to erase her again." Victor Hale said, "I secured order." The deputy leaned closer to the glass. Why did the seal look cleaner than the town could afford? The deputy entered with quiet boots and asked for the copy. Evelyn did not move. The room thinned. Victor Hale said, "There is a complaint of theft." Claire's face closed like a file. Claire Morton said, "I have to hold both documents." Noah Hart said, "But we found the truth." Evelyn felt heat, then a dull ache like a bruise forming. She placed the copy down and kept her palm there. Victor reached for it. May stepped between and shook her head once. The deputy's hands settled on the page. Evelyn Hart said, "You will log both, and you will log my statement." Victor Hale said, "You will sign a receipt for surrender." The word stung. The stamp clacked. What did they just give up to keep the door open? Outside, heat rose off the pavement, and noise from traffic smeared the air. Evelyn stood with empty hands and a line on a receipt. Her chest felt carved. "May Hart," said he planned this. Noah kicked at a bottle cap and said nothing. Claire stepped out and faced the lot, not them. Claire Morton said, "I will call when the notice posts." Her voice was thin but real. She slipped a card into Evelyn's palm and looked away. Victor drove past, slow, windows up, eyes on the road. Evelyn Hart said, "He forged the past and borrowed the seal." The wind flipped the edge of the receipt like a white flag. She closed her fist and felt paper bite. She would find the original page, the one no seal could mimic. Where would the oldest ledger hide its last truth? Evening settled like gauze after the hard noon at the clerk's office, and air thinned. The house held its breath. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table and watched steam fade from an untouched cup. The receipt lay folded like a bad map. "May Hart," said he, bent the seal. Her voice was the soft scrape of a match that will not catch. Noah traced a breadcrumb trail of dust and waited for courage. Wind pushed a loose gutter, tapping the window like a metronome. Evelyn gathered the scraps of days and fit them by touch. The ledger line, the torn photo. The winter meeting. Silence had a shape now. Evelyn Hart said, "He moved before us because someone told him where to move." The room felt lighter and lonelier at once. A page of the parish index flashed in her mind. What did the second ledger keep that the first did not? The smell of damp cedar opened a door in memory, and the room changed weight. Evelyn stood in the attic with a box of hymn sheets, and the past began to speak. Pages rustled like a winter choir. "May Hart," said he, came with papers and a promise. The words pulled a veil. A stove hissed in that old day. Snow tapped the panes. Lydia wrapped a shawl and said nothing. Victor Hale said, "Sign and safety follows." The pen waited like a thin knife. The name on the deed was steady until a hand pressed down. The ink stuttered. A sigh. A door shut. In the attic now, Evelyn found a small ledger. Not the parish book, but a household list. In its back seam, a page was stitched with red thread. What truth hides where thread meets paper, and no clerk looks? Evelyn unpicked the red thread with a sewing needle while the attic ticked with heat. Her breath slowed to match the faint clicks. Noah held a flashlight and did not blink. May Hart said, "If it is there, let it live." The page slid free, thin as a leaf. It held a list of debts and one line in a careful hand. Lydia Hart said, "I refuse to sell the river lot to Victor Hale," a note of witness and date. Evelyn read it aloud, and the air dropped a degree. Steps creaked on the stairs below, then stilled. Evelyn Hart said, "This is not a copy. This is her voice on paper." She heard her own pulse like a drum. She felt a door form in her chest and swing open to cold truth. What purpose does a family serve if it erases its bravest name? They met Victor on the back porch as rain started again, small and mean. The yard smelled of wet iron. Victor Hale said, "You are trespassing in rooms you do not own." He stood easy, like a man on his own map. Evelyn held the page, but not out of reach. Evelyn Hart said, "You wanted the river to move a boundary," and Lydia said no. Victor's eyes softened as if teaching a child. Victor Hale said, "Families fail without leaders, and I lead." The words were smooth stones. May Hart said, "You lead with locks." Thunder walked the road. Noah watched a drop gather on the porch lamp and fall like a bead of time. Evelyn tasted metal on her tongue and knew it was not rain. What if the enemy was not only a man, but a tradition that loved silence more than truth? Night deepened and left a clean edge on every sound. Evelyn sat with the page and felt its weight anchor her ribs. May closed the attic hatch and leaned on the wall. Noah counted thunder gaps until the storm moved on. Evelyn Hart said, "This is enough to speak, even if not to win." The line did not tremble. It stood. May Hart said, "Then we speak." The house seemed to breathe with them. A plan formed in simple steps, like stones across water. Copy the page. Place it in the parish book where eyes must pass. Stand with the river at their backs and say the name. Evelyn felt sorrow open and not drown her. She stood. Evelyn Hart said, "The truth cost her, and now it changes us." The room cleared. Dawn waited. Act 5 would meet them at the door. Before sunrise, the house held a fierce quiet, like lungs full before a shout. Footsteps moved in measured beats. Evelyn wrapped the page in a clear sleeve. Her breath fogged the window. May Hart said, "We go now." Tires hissed on wet road beyond the trees. A porch board clicked. Victor Hale said, "No need to make a scene." His tone was a lid lowered on boiling water. The door latch seemed loud as a bell. Noah shouldered the backpack. Evelyn Hart said, "We make a scene because silence starved us." Wind slipped under the eaves and shook the gutter in staccato. The road to the parish lay open and slick. They stepped out together, bodies tight with current. At the gate, headlights struck the fence and held. Which way would the first move come from? At the parish steps, bells were still, and the river murmured like a low crowd. Victor blocked the door with a small, fixed smile. Victor Hale said, "You have no standing." Evelyn felt anger rise, but chose words like tools. Evelyn Hart said, "Lydia's line stands here." May Hart said, "I kept shut. I open now." A deputy crossed the square, slow and certain. The sky lightened, thin and colorless. Evelyn raised the sleeve, and light caught the ink. Victor Hale said, "False paper breeds disorder." Noah Hart said, "It is her hand." The deputy checked faces, then the seal that was not a seal, then the date. The square seemed to lean toward them. Victor stepped closer, and the air cinched. Who would be first to reach the handle and make the morning choose? The door opened from inside, slow and heavy, and Claire stood there with tired eyes. Claire Morton said, "The notice posted at first light." She looked at Victor and did not bow. Evelyn felt relief pierce and leave an ache. May Hart said, "You kept your word." Claire nodded and reached for the sleeve. The deputy lifted a hand to pause her. The moment stretched thin. Claire Morton said, "I can place it with the ledger index as public comment." Victor's jaw flexed. Victor Hale said, "You risk your post." Claire's hand shook and then steadied. She took the sleeve and stepped back into the doorway. The square's noise vanished, as if the world held a breath for her. What price does the helper pay when truth enters the record? Inside the nave, the sound was vast, a soft ocean of wood and echo. Evelyn walked the aisle with Claire, and every step said a name. Victor's shoes clicked in hard reply. Claire Morton said, "Here," and opened the index bind. Evelyn slid the page beside the parish ledger copy, the red thread still visible along one edge. Victor Hale said, "Remove it." His voice snapped like cold wire. May Hart said, "Leave it." The deputy stood by the door and did not move. Evelyn Hart said, "You stole a boundary and wrote a lie to hide it." Victor reached and touched the plastic, then paused as if heat burned through it. The binder closed with a weighty clap. The echo climbed the rafters and fell back like rain. What breaks first? A lie under light, or a hand that will not open? When they stepped outside, the sun finally broke the rim of the river, pale and sure. Noise returned in small pieces. A bike bell, a dog bark, a door latch. Evelyn felt a hollow ring inside and did not fear it. May Hart said, "We named her." The words planted and held. Victor passed them without a glance, a line pulled too tight to bend. Noah Hart said, "Will it hold?" Evelyn Hart said, "It will be seen." She looked at the water and thought of a boundary that moved in rain and thaw. The page lived in a book where eyes go. The lie would have to stand beside it and breathe. A sparrow crossed the light with fast wings. Evelyn lifted her face and let the morning claim her. The era of whispering ended here, and a harder era began. Smoke thinned from the church candles and the town square exhaled. The morning rang soft, as if sound had learned to walk. Evelyn stood by the steps and watched dust lift from the rail. Her hands remembered the page and then released it. May Hart said, "Breathe." The word was small and whole. Noah counted the slow bells to 5 and stopped. A sparrow hopped near the drain and found a crumb. The river moved with patient shoulders. No urgency, no threat. Evelyn felt rooms inside her settle. Chairs set back under tables. Windows opened. The cost of truth lay quiet. But it did not leave. Shadows hid under the steps and waited their turn. Evelyn Hart said, "We will pay what remains." She looked at the door and knew something was gone for good. Later, the house felt larger, as if walls had moved a few inches back. Evelyn sat where night once pressed hard and listened to the simple tick of the clock. Tea cooled untouched. Her chest carried heat and equal measure. She thought of the deputy's careful eyes and Claire's thin, brave hands. She saw Lydia in the torn photo corner, steady and quiet. May Hart whispered. I kept silence and thought it was care. The whisper held both grief and rest. Noah passed the doorway and paused, then let her have the room. Wind nudged the gutter and then stilled. Evelyn Hart said, "It was fear that wore a mask of duty." A long breath left her, and the floor did not creak. Life would go on, but with a different weight that did not pinch. At dusk, the river took on a silver line and time slowed to a hush. Evelyn stood by the fence with the page's copy folded in her pocket. She felt a presence, not heavy, not cold, only near. The memory of Lydia walked beside her like a breath she could keep. Lydia Hart said, "Hold the boundary with patience, not with rage." The words were imagined and still true. May watched from the porch and did not call out. Noah set a small stone on the empty grave space and stepped back. The air made room for kindness without forgetting harm. Evelyn Hart said, "I will keep your name where light goes." The river answered with soft backs under the surface. Forgiveness settled like dew, not loud, not quick, but real. In the attic, dust made tiny suns in the beam of a single lamp. May opened a tin and took out a folded note. Paper rasped like dry leaves. "May Hart," said. "She asked me to keep this if fear ever won." Evelyn listened to the old room tell old weather. The note spoke of winter bread lines, of the river's rise, of a man who loved only order. Lydia's script was firm, not grand. It asked the keeper to choose light if the house went dark. Noah sat cross-legged and held the thread they had pulled. May Hart said, "I failed once." Evelyn Hart said, "You chose now." The lamp hummed, and the dust drifted like soft rain. A small, tired smile found May and stayed. At morning edge, Evelyn walked to the family plot with a simple wooden marker. The sky was pale and honest. Dew held to the blades like small vows. She set the marker in the empty place and pressed the soil with her palm. Evelyn Hart said, "Lydia Hart." The name felt clean without echo or defense. May stood by, quiet and sure. Noah counted 3 breaths and smiled to himself. A robin stepped in the shadow of the new wood and tilted its head. The house behind them seemed lighter by a window or two. Evelyn Hart said, "We will tend this." She stayed until the wood took the light. The world did not change its shape, but the heart did, and it was enough to walk into Act 7. Silence met them at breakfast, not empty, just wide. The kettle clicked and then rested. Light moved across the table like a slow river. Evelyn folded the receipt one last time and placed it under a jar. May Hart said, "We keep what matters and release the rest." Her voice was soft and even. Noah buttered toast with care and set a slice by each cup. The house kept a new rhythm, simple and kind. Outside, the wind forgot to push, and the gutter stayed still. Evelyn Hart said, "We lost the years we could have carried her openly." The words did not try to bite. They named the hole, and left it whole. Was it worth the ache to hold the truth in both hands? Evelyn walked the river path with the copy in a fresh sleeve. Her steps matched the water's count. The sky held thin clouds like linen. She reached the parish door and paused, then slid the duplicate into the public notice frame. Claire Morton said, "Let it live where eyes pass." Her voice came like a breeze from within. Evelyn Hart said, "No more drawers." She turned, and the square looked smaller and kinder. A truck idled, then moved on. Footsteps crossed the bricks and did not rush. The ink shone for a second and then settled to matte. The motion was simple, like a key returning to its hook. She felt the chapter close without a slam and without apology. Back home, May opened a radio drawer and found a small tape. The label read a name and a winter year. The player clicked, and a soft hiss filled the room. Lydia Hart said, "If this reaches you, keep the river as it is." The voice was steady, grainy, warm. Evelyn closed her eyes and let the sound build a bridge. Noah leaned on the door frame and did not speak. May Hart said, "I thought I lost this." The words did not ask for pardon. They shared air. The tape ended with a quiet laugh that felt like a window. Evelyn Hart said, "This is the line we hold." The room kept the echo and did not let it fade. Days passed with small work and clear air. Fences were mended and hinges oiled. The town remembered how to nod again. Evelyn helped at records 2 afternoons a week. Claire Morton said, "We are building a shelf for stories that fought to breathe." The light in the office felt wider. May sat on the porch and stitched, thread steady, hands sure. Noah learned the river's safe crossings by heart. Evelyn Hart said, "We go slow and right." The words fell into the day like seed. Evening came without edge. The world did not forget, and it did not punish. It moved forward with scars that knew their names. At the river at dusk, Evelyn set the torn photo corner under a smooth stone. The water carried sky like quiet fire. She stood without hurry and listened to the long hush. "May Hart," said. "Say it once more." Evelyn Hart said. "Lydia Hart." The wind touched the grass and was gone. Noah's shoes scuffed the path and then stilled. No bells, no sirens, only breath. Evelyn placed her hand on the fence and felt wood answer warm. She smiled, small and true. Truth must never be owned, only kept in the open where light can find it.